Good morning, everyone. We'll wait a few minutes for everyone to arrive, and then we'll kick off the webinar. Hello, everyone. We're waiting a few minutes for everybody to join in. I see that Tanguy, you were raising your hand. Feel free. I'll allow you to talk if you have an issue.
No, sorry, it was a mistake.
Okay, no problem. Okay, I think we can kick off. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our monthly webinar. Today, we will talk about LGBTI in the workplace. Some of you probably know that one of the Shift's 4 main priorities for 2020 is diversity and inclusion in the workplace. Our long-term goal is obviously to create more diversity and inclusion in Belgian workplaces. So we find it important that organizations who have solutions for that can meet organizations who need solutions, because as you know, we very much believe in partnerships and collaboration and exchanging expertise, so that real lasting change can be created. Therefore, we have within this domain, we have scheduled a number of general sessions where we notice that a lot of our members are at different stages when it comes to implementing more diversity and inclusion. So we started with the why earlier in February. Earlier this week, we had a session on how to manage diverse teams. Later on this year, we will reschedule actually a session on how to create an inclusive organization. Parallel to that, we also schedule some sessions where we focus on a specific diversity group. However, I do want to say that that obviously the shift envisions an inclusive society where we hope that people are not put into categories. However, we're trying to meet the need here and the request that sometimes zooming in on a specific category is needed to equip organizations to implement an inclusive organization for all in their company or organization. So today we focus on the LGBTI community. It may not always be the first group that comes to mind when focusing on gender and inclusion, on diversity and inclusion. However, today we will learn that hiding your identity takes a lot of energy that cannot be focused on the job. So it is an important group to take into account when you develop your diversity and inclusion policy in your organization. Now, before introducing the speakers, allow me to give you some housekeeping rules. There is a chat function in the toolbar below. Feel free to post any issue you have. We will try to address that. At the end of the session, we will have a Q&A. For that, I would like to ask you to use the Q&A button also below in the toolbar and only use that button to ask your questions. Do know that the webinar is being recorded. We will also give access to this recording on our website after the webinar. And I will also send you the presentation after the webinar, including the contact details of the speakers. I'd like to introduce the speakers now. I am Annelies Storme. I forgot to mention that. I'm a change facilitator at The Shift, responsible for work and inclusion. I have my colleague Jan Klaas Solmers with me, who is co-hosting the webinar with me. And the main speakers for today are Eva de Klerk from Savaria, which is the Flemish advocacy organization for the LGBTI community, and Michel Ducaté from Clix Visitwe, a non-profit consultancy with expertise on sexual and gender diversity. We currently have about 20 participants, and I wish you a great webinar, and I give now the floor to Eva.
So, hi everyone. As Annelies mentioned, my name is Eva de Klerk, and I am the International Policy Officer at Savaria. As Annelies also mentioned, this is the umbrella organization of LGBTI movements in Flanders, and we do advocacy work, and we also support our member organizations. Apart from being the International Policy Officer, I also work on a project on SDG 8, and that is also why I am participating in this webinar.
And hi everyone, I am Michel Ducaté. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the account manager of Click, the training organization of Savaria, and we focus on gender and sexual diversity. So we're going to start with what is LGBTI. LGBTI is an acronym that refers to categories of people, the L for lesbian, G for gay, B for bisexual, T for transgender, I for intersex. I assume you are familiar with the terms lesbian and bisexual. The term transgender, however, is a term that describes that the gender you are assigned at birth does not match your gender identity. The term intersex is used to refer to individuals whose sex characteristics or body parts do not match the body parts that society links to a man or a woman. This can be the case for visible sexual body parts, such as testicles, or invisible characteristics, such as chromosomes. The letters LGBTI are most commonly used because historically these groups have been fighting for their rights and have become more known. However, sometimes other letters are used. For instance, LGBT, so without the I for intersex, or LBT women. The reason for this is that sometimes research or actions only focus on some groups. So you will see during this webinar that some letters are left out. However, in general, CLIC refers to LGBTI because CLIC is linked to Savaria, which is the umbrella of LGBTI movements. In this webinar, we will not go into detail about these categories of people, but it is important to take away from this webinar that there is diversity when it comes to SOGIESC. SOGIESC is another acronym for sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, and sex characteristics. This acronym is also used because instead of referring to people, it refers to identity aspects and is more inclusive. It also includes people who do not identify as LGBTI. An easier way to say SOGIESC, or what we'll use in this webinar the most, is sexual and gender diversity.
As you are members of the Shift, I know that you're all familiar with the SDGs. So you know that this is a global framework that is to be realized by 2030 by all and for all. So leave no one behind. The key principle is really important here. Now, when we look at LGBTI individuals, we see that they can experience specific challenges when it comes to these goals and targets. So it is important to know and to be mindful of the fact that these challenges are there, and that when you are interpreting the SDGs and implementing them, that you pay attention to LGBTI inclusion. Now, our focus today will be on the workplace. So this is clearly linked to SDG 8. Important there is that we strive towards economic growth, but that this happens in an inclusive manner. And so that decent work for all people, including LGBTI people, is realized. Relevant targets here are decent job creation, full and productive employment for all, equal pay for work of equal value, and that labor rights are respected and there is a safe and secure working environment for all.
So in the following slides, we are going to present some numbers on why it is important to work on sexual and gender diversity. The numbers we use come from research that focuses on sexual and gender diversity in the workplace, so LGBTI also, and that the numbers are from research based on Flanders, Belgium, or countries with a similar job market that is similar to the Belgian one, for instance, the UK or the Netherlands. As an employer, it is key to attract the best employees. We all know we are in a war on talent, but what do potential employees consider when choosing a job or employer? In the LGBT community, we see that 30% of LGBT employees base their job choice on whether an organization is LGBT inclusive or not. And it's not only important for LGBTI people, 72% of allies of the LGBTI community, so people who are supportive of the community, also base their choice of employer on whether the company supports the community and treats LGBT employees equally. So when you as an employer do not focus on sexual and gender diversity, you risk losing a huge segment of potential employees. Let's take a look at what leaders think of this and what actually happens in the workplace. So this is, again, based on LGBT. In a study on LGBT inclusion, 95% of the business leaders say that they see innovation as a vital asset for the organization. 90% of the LGBT employees say that they want to be innovative. However, of those 95% business leaders, only 76% said they actually take steps to empower LGBT employees to be innovative. And only 47 of the LGBT employees really feel empowered to innovate. Half of the LGBT employees thus indicated they do not feel empowered, which means they cannot use their full potential. And apart from not feeling empowered, many LGBT employees also feel that they cannot be open about their sexual and gender diversity in the workplace. When it comes to young adults who are fully open to the outside world about their sexual orientation, at school, amongst family, with their friends, they're fully open about their orientation, we see that 41% of them go back in the closet when they start their first job. This out of fear of missing out on promotions or being treated differently. Amongst lesbian, bisexual, and trans women, only 29% are fully open. And as we see an improvement amongst male employees, so the gay, bisexual, and trans men, only 44% is open. Also, what we can see is that 40% of the bisexual employees is not out. It's not out of the closet, it's not open. Bisexuality is still often seen as a phase, both in and outside the LGBT community. It is often laughed at or laughed away, and that gives these people the feeling that they are not being taken seriously. Also, 76% of LGBTI people have hidden or have lied about their sexual orientation in the workplace. Of course, this causes enormous stress to these employees and reduces the general atmosphere on the work floor. This we call the cost of the closet. A perfect way to illustrate this is an informal conversation between colleagues. Hi, how was your weekend? And then you see, have I already come out of the closet? For the person asking this question, yes. Tell freely, I can tell my happiness, I feel brilliant. So this is a good conversation. I tried, but they did not quite register it. So return the question, how was yours? You don't really feel included. So it's already a bit of, and then you avoid the informal contacts and seem antisocial, an outsider. If not, you just shut up about it. You try to suppress it. You try to hide it. You try to change your movements and things. So you take a lot of this stress, which is a very normal, small conversation of 5 minutes, and you turn this into a very long one. So working on gender and sexual diversity, out of research, it shows us that there's a strong correlation between promoting LGBTI inclusion and the improving of the following fields. You will attract more talents. The overall well-being of your employees will rise. The stress will be reduced. You will have a higher innovation, a higher performance, a better motivation, and of course, a better brand image.
Now that we've shown that it is important to work on sexual and gender diversity in the workplace, we would like to give you some tips and tricks what you can do. So as an employee, what can you do? We'll give you 3 words that you can take away from this. The first one is reflection. It is important as an employee to reflect on your own sexual and gender identity. So try to figure out where you are in terms of gender identity, your gender expression, your gender, what your sexual orientation is, what your romantic attraction is. And when you've done this, you can check if you feel like others, colleagues, your bosses, if they adapt their expectations based on this, their expectations of you. But you can also check if you actually do the same for your colleagues. You can also check if you see some norms in your organization or in your company. Do you see, for instance, that there is a kind of dress code, that male employees are expected to dress very manly, that female employees are expected to wear heels, to wear skirts? Or do you perhaps see that if there are tasks that require good people skills, do you maybe see that these are more often appointed to female colleagues or to gay employees? These are examples of norms. So even if you do not immediately see them, it can be a good tip to just walk around in the office, to interact with other colleagues in a formal way and an informal way, and check if you might maybe notice some of these norms So first word, reflection. Second one is intersections. It's important to avoid different identity aspects of a person and check if these identity aspects influence each other and in what way. So take, for example, a male colleague who is white and is gay, and a male colleague who is a person of color. And we see that people tend to put a person in a box according to one identity aspect. So reduce a person and then put the person in a certain box. So going back to our example, we had a male colleague who is white and gay. We see that people tend to put that person in the box of LGBTI community. When we take the male colleague we see actually that people tend to put that person in the box of person of color. Now, it's important to be mindful of the fact that every identity aspect comes with norms, comes with expectations. And so it can be that, for instance, being gay is not a problem in your company, but that there's still some discrimination going on based on being a person of color or based on being white. So if you do not take these interactions, these intersections into account, you may be leaving out, maybe not paying a way that these interact and the different forms of discrimination. So reflection, of course, all know that humor is important in the workplace, that it gives you positive energy, that it can release tensions. But it's always important to be mindful with jokes. Jokes often come from ideas, from prejudices, from one group in society has about another group in society, and these often exist without people knowing about the backstory of these other groups, these other communities. So it is important to be mindful of that, and when you're joking, it has an impact on other people. Let's take an example. Maybe you are you have a very good friendship with one of your colleagues who is a bisexual woman, and you often joke around with your colleague about her not being able to choose between men or between women, and you have already had a good conversation about that. You know that this is just a joke between you two. You've discussed this. You know that the person also finds it funny. You've discussed her sexual orientation, so you're very open about that, and it really is just a joke. But know that other colleagues might hear these conversations, and so maybe there is another colleague who is very confused about his sexual orientation and is struggling with that. And for that person, these jokes might be very hurtful and might give him the impression that having non-normative sexual orientation is not okay. So it can push that person back into the closet. And in any case, I know that all of you can come up with one joke about the LGBTI community, but just always know that whether you are the first person to tell this joke, or whether you are the 300th person to tell this joke, these can be very harmful. And even if colleagues laugh at them, maybe that's just because they don't want to cause trouble, or they are actually afraid to speak up. So as an employee, reflection, intersection here. Again, 3 words. First one, involve. If you take a decision, it is always important to consult with your employees. Involve LGBTI employees, but also other employees. This is in general, but definitely when it goes about sexual and gender diversity. Never assume that you know best, or that you know the impact of a decision, that you know how a decision comes across with someone. Let's take an example, a trans man, for instance. One of your employees is a trans man, and the employee would like to go to the men's toilets. Maybe there is some resistance amongst other colleagues about this. It is important in this case to not only talk about this with the trans man, but to also talk about this with the other employees and to go into dialogue and to find a solution that works for everyone involved. Secondly, prioritize. We know what employers can do and what they should do to work on sexual and gender diversity, but there is no one-size-fits-all solution. If you run a company, for instance, that offers consultancy on marketing, it is important to set your priorities that match your company. So for instance, when you make these marketing campaigns, it can be more interested to focus, for instance, on inclusive language. If you run a company that focuses on HR, you can maybe set the priority of LGBTI inclusive recruiting. So make an action plan that matches the core of your company, of your business, and make sure that what you want to achieve, that you always practice what you preach. And this brings us to the third word, embed. Make sure that your company becomes an expert on LGBTI issues and really install it as an objective. Don't work on sexual and gender diversity when it fits you as a one-time thing. No, make it last. Make sure that your efforts last, that is sustainable, and that you work on it in a holistic manner. So what you can do, for instance, is install the position of a confidential advisor that knows the ins and outs about sexual and gender diversity, someone that employees, whether they are LGBTI or not, can go to talk about this issue in all anonymity and that they can feel comfortable with. Another idea is to give training sessions and make sure that training sessions on sexual and gender diversity, and to not just do this as a one-time thing, but to make sure that maybe the training is repeated every year or that you offer different trainings on this. So as an employer, involve, prioritize, and embed.
So how can you work on this? How to work on this? You can provide training sessions on the diversity, the different diversity topics, either physically in your organization as someone who comes there and speaks and gives training, or also online through webinars like this one, or e-learnings. This way it's also possible to train employees who are not at the office quite often. People who are on the roads, sales representatives, salespeople, people who go to different countries and who stay there for a longer time, but you want them to be trained also on the topic, of course. Then you can consult. There are organizations out there who have a lot of knowledge on the different kinds of diversity. So don't be afraid to ask for help. You can't be an expert on everything. That's not possible. You can try to, but it will be very hard. And if you have a specific question, let's say about how to run an inclusive marketing campaign, reach out to that expert, because they most of the times have the best connections to and the best knowledge about the community. So instead of, as an example, the LGBTI community. And then we have different tools. You can use different tools. So use and implement those tools that are available. They are specifically created for you to help you. For instance, to help your employees understand the advantage of diversity, or to assess your organization on the current level of diversity and inclusion. And on that note, on the tools, I want to present you the inclusion scan that Click has developed. The Click Inclusion Scan is a tool that assesses the current level of the organization in terms of sexual and gender diversity. As an organization, you can use the Inclusion Scan as a self-assessment tool, or Click can also draw up a personalized report based on the scan that you as an employer fulfill with a recommendation report. The inclusion scan was split up into different domains, which enables Click to examine the organization in a very accurate way. This allows the organization to set specific objects and priorities per domain. The different domains are 1. Vision, strategy and policies. 2. Leadership. 3. HR and employees. 4. internal communication and visibility. 5, employee diversity networks. 6, quality assessment and monitoring. And 7, external engagement. You run through the scan in a chronological order, and all of these aspects are dealt with because it is important to work on this topic in a holistic manner. There are, for instance, companies that sell, let's say, rainbow flags and have a marketing strategy that focuses on the LGBTI community, but at the same time do not have a policy to work on sexual and gender diversity towards their own employees. This reduces the credibility of the company and can even be considered as window dressing. By doing this scan, you can see your strong points and on what points you need some improvements. By going into detail per domain, you can make sure you practice what you preach and set specific KPIs, for instance.
So we talked about LGBTI inclusion in the workplace in Belgium. We gave you some numbers and we gave you some tips. But at the beginning of the webinar, I also talked about SDG 8. And as you are all familiar with the SDGs, you know that this is a global framework and so that it is to be realized all over the world. Now, we also know that there is this thing called globalization. So it is very rare that as a company in Belgium, as an organization, you do not have any links with countries outside of Belgium. You might, for instance, have a branch that is based in another country, or you might have partners in another country. Perhaps your employees do working trips abroad, or maybe even work abroad as an expat. So these are very clear links with other countries, but even if none of these options apply, because of globalization, people are also always looking abroad. So maybe someone is looking at your company here in Belgium to find some inspiration for their own work, and in that case, it is never hurtful to set a good example. Now, important to know, in these interactions outside of Belgium, it is important to know that LGBTI individuals, employees, often face the same challenges that we have discussed here in Belgium in other countries as well. I'll give you some examples, but important is to go back to the targets that we discussed for SDG 8. So one of them was also that there is decent job creation for everyone. Now, we've talked about stereotypes, and it is actually the case that a lot of the stereotypes that we have, that we can see here in Belgium, also exist abroad. One clear example is, for instance, that in many other countries, there's also the stereotype that gay men should work in hair salons, and people maybe do not see any other job opportunity for them. Another example is that a study in Congo showed that the appearance of trans people caused some issues because other colleagues or clients were not comfortable with their appearance, and so they were only allowed to work in backroom operations. A study on Australia actually also showed that because of the stereotypes that exist, trans people there are more often hired on the basis of a contract basis or a casual basis. When we look at target 8.5 of the SDGs, we discussed equal pay for work of equal value. Well, there is also an issue there worldwide. For instance, a study in Thailand showed that lesbian women were only paid half in a company, half of their other female colleagues. And even in Western countries, a meta-analysis of countries like the US, the UK, Sweden, the Netherlands, France, Australia, showed that homosexual employees on average are paid 11% less than their heterosexual counterparts. Now, if we look at another target of SDG 8 on safe and secure working environments, we also see that this is an issue worldwide. Important to know is when you work with expats or if you do working trips abroad, that in many countries, a non-normative sexual orientation is still criminalized. Let's say if you have an employee that needs to travel to Russia, this is the case there, so it is important to take that into account. But safe and secure working environment is not only about legislation, but is also about facilities. Michelle will talk about that later as well, but let's take restroom facilities, for instance. In the US, they saw in a study that this caused trans people so much stress that actually 27% of trans people had changed their job, had changed their company because of this. So similar challenges, but other countries. Now, what can you do when you want to work on sexual and gender diversity in these other countries? Use similar tools, but use another implementation. And Savaria is developing with Click an e-learning that gives companies tips on how to do this. And one of these tools is a roadmap, in which 4 steps are very important. First of all, know the context of the other country that you are interacting with. Secondly, consult the local LGBT community because they are the experts on their context, on the needs that they have, on the challenges, but also on the opportunities to work on sexual and gender diversity in the workplace. Third point, adapt your tools, adapt your actions to fit the context. So you can use a similar tool as the one in Belgium, but make sure it is adapted to the context. And as a fourth point, make sure that the tools that you use are sustainable. So in this e-learning, we have developed a case study on South Africa, as many Flemish companies are working there or have links with South Africa. When we look at the first point, know the context. There are specificities in this context, and an important one of them is that South Africa is often seen as one of the most progressive countries on sexual orientation and gender identity because it was the first country in the world to include protection against discrimination on the basis of this in their constitution. However, an important part of their history is also apartheid. And during apartheid, sexuality is actually used to control. Sexuality was controlled to establish the perfect race. And so a lot of the challenges that the community still faces today actually stem from that period. So if you want to work on this in that context, consult the local LGBT community to see how you can work on this, and we have a partner there called the LGBT Plus Forum that is happy to help you with this. Now, when we talk about the tools, Michelle has just described the inclusion scan that we have. Well, the LGBT Plus Forum has actually developed the same thing, but you will see if you go through that inclusion scan that it is completely adapted, that there is a different implementation because it contains the different legislation there, it contains the sensibilities that you need to be aware of in the local context, and also what you can work on. And then in terms of making the actions that you do sustainable, well, for the inclusion scan, it is like this. You start from a starting point and then you set objectives and you work on them. So it is really included in your work cycle, and that way you make the changes sustainable. Well, so I talked about the e-learning. This will be available on Click Academy at the end of 2020. But if you're already interested and if you cannot wait, then it is also possible to test the e-learning for free. And for that, you can always contact me at my email address at Savaria.
So now all these tips and tricks and some points on why to work on it. And we also wanted to share, of course, a good practice. And for this good practice, we've chosen the Flemish government. I'm going to show you some things that they've done to implement the diversity and sexual and gender diversity. So a powerful signal from the top. Excuse me, because the print screen is in Dutch, but it says that the Chairman's Board of the Flemish government has signed the Click Inclusivity Charter. So it gives a powerful signal, not only internally towards their employees, but also externally towards the society, that the Flemish government is committed to work on sexual and gender diversity. It is a small step, but it has a great impact. It shows that they, as an organization, as an employer, find this topic very important. For employees, it is important to know that there is a support from above. So if you want to work on it, if you want to do something about it, know that there is support from above. Then we talked about, like Eva also talked about an action plan. I talked about an action plan. The Flemish government has drawn up an action plan to work on equal opportunities and diversity, in which they set clear priorities. They said on what steps to work first, and in these priorities, they have set out concrete objectives. And these objectives have to be achieved by the entities of the Flemish government. To make sure it is possible to measure all progress in a clear way and to evaluate it also afterwards, of course. Throughout the action plan, different target groups have been included into the different priorities. So this is the intersectionality we talked about earlier into the webinar. You can see, and we can see, that the Flemish government has clearly mainstreamed LGBTI inclusion throughout the action plan. But of course, a plan is only a plan. Now we're going to look what they are doing to implement those steps into the organization. So they've created a diversity network in which all Flemish civil servants can join. This network has support from the Flemish government to organize multiple events on days like Idahat, International Day Against Homophobia and Transphobia, the Transgender Day, the Pride, so that employees know that they can go to the network and raise an idea or for an event, and they will get support if financially or with through various social media to share it. The Flemish government also actively encourages its employees to show that they are allies of the community. They do this on the online platform for employees, but also offline through various tools, in which the most popular one is a rainbow lanyard. So you can show that you are wearing this lanyard and show that you are an ally of the community. So that this is a very important one, because we've talked about that one colleague who may be afraid to show, or who is struggling with his sexual orientation. And he is not sure, or he or she is not sure that it is okay to talk about this in the workplace, or to colleagues about it. But by wearing this lanyard and showing that you're an ally, it creates a more safer environment for them to come out or to talk about their feelings or to talk about the topic in general. Also trainings. The Flemish government offers on the employee platform trainings for everyone who wants to work and who is working on diversity, and they can choose out of various training courses, and they are given by the Flemish government. Also, it is possible to ask for specific training courses, but some training courses are mandatory. For example, there's a quarterly training for the diversity officers of the different entities within the Flemish government. And they have to come by and they have to follow this day, and it is with some trainings. And for this day, Click has already provided various training courses, such as the basic training around SDGs, inclusive communication, This is for the marketing, could be for everything. Inclusive recruitment for HR, also stereotyping in the workplace. And we have given multiple train-the-trainer workshops. And the very exciting one is that in all new buildings of the Flemish government, the toilets in the entrance hall will be gender inclusive. So the facilities are being provided to and are gender inclusive. So what is the advantage of a gender inclusive toilet is that, let's say you are a dad and you want to go with your child to the toilet to, let's say, change the diaper. Most of the times this room or space to change the diaper room will be in the toilets for women. So it's always a hurdle to go in there because you know you'll be looked at it. So an inclusive toilet, and we can share with you this later, is an area where it's one area where all the toilets are together. So you have the urinals, but also the other toilets where to sit down. You will have specific toilets for, let's say, when you have as a woman to change your menstruational cup, but also a room for transgender people where they can safely change their outfits without being or without to go into the disabled person's toilet, for instance. And this from now on, all new buildings will have. But also at Click, we believe that working on sexual and gender diversity should be done in a sustainable manner. Therefore, we've created a trajectory based on the needs of the Flemish government. So we started with the inclusion scan to see what their starting point was. And together we've set out objectives to work on. After implementing some activities and changes, we did an evaluation to check the level of improvement. This is then the starting point of the next cycle. So we start from the new situation, again, assess the needs, determine the action points, and implement them. In this way, sexual and gender diversity is being implemented in a way that matches the needs and the tempo of the Flemish government. And through this continuous process, we delve deeper into the subject of gender and sexual diversity cycle by cycle, which allows the government to become an expert on the topic step by step. And this was the good practice. And if you would have any other, if you have questions, this is now the moment you can ask them.
Yes, hello. So thank you very much, Eva and Michelle. I think we learned a lot today, and I would like to open the floor now to the participants. So if you have a question, do use the Q&A button, and we will allow Michelle and Eva to answer those. I don't see questions yet. I was told before that doesn't necessarily mean that everything is clear, so I'll try not to repeat that. But, of course, you are also very welcome to answer questions after, and just I will send you the contact details of Eva and Michelle as well, so you can also address them directly to them. I do see questions coming in now. I'm interested in the kind of trainings the Flemish government gives to its own employees, also diversity in general. I don't know, Michelle, you want to answer that question?
Yes, I'm going to answer to that question. I will ask for, I know the trainings we have given, but I can ask for the different possibilities. But I can give this, I will send you this information later if possible, because I have to look it up.
Okay.
And yeah, no, that's it.
I think it might also be interesting to mention that the charter that Michelle mentioned, that the Flemish government has signed, is something that everyone can actually sign. It's available on Click, and actually the Shift has also signed it. So it's already a big first step.
Yes, so we have decided to sign this charter as well. So I invite you all to do the same, of course. And in the meantime, I see another question coming in. In which language do you give the trainings? Eva, I'm going to let you answer that.
Yeah, well, because we are, Savaria is a Flemish umbrella organization and Click is its training center. The trainings are mostly in Flemish and in English. To give a bit of background, we have our special Belgian structures, so with the different regions, and the same accounts for the umbrella organizations of LGBTI movements. So we have our colleagues in Brussels, which are the Rainbow House Brussels, and we have Arc-en-Ciel Wallonie in the Walloon region.
I want to pick up on that one also. For the moment, we do it, as Eva said, in Dutch and English. But we are in the process of adding French to it, but not for the moment yet. But this will happen rather soon.
Maybe Eva or Michelle, can I ask you to maybe put in the chat the names of the organizations in Brussels and Wallonia, so that people can look those up. Do put it to everyone if you put it in the chat. Thank you.
The thing Eva talked about Arc-en-Ciel in Wallonie. So Click is partnering up with them, so the general one in Belgium can be Click, and we will partner up for the French part with Arc-en-Ciel normally.
Yeah, so Savaria has a training center, but this is not the case for every umbrella organization. But I'll mention just the umbrellas in the chat.
Okay, thank you. Well, if there's no more questions from the audience, I actually still have a question, if I may. I was wondering, Eva, you mentioned that homosexual men, or it's been proven that homosexual men earn less than heterosexual men very often. And I was just wondering if that is maybe a result of the fact that masculine characteristics are often more valued in the workplace, and that maybe homosexual men are seen as having more feminine characteristics. So I was wondering if that maybe comes, if that is a reason. I don't know.
Yeah, well, there is a clear link with gender. Discrimination costs to gender. So often gender is understood as in a binary manner, so men and women. We see it more broadly, but it is indeed, it has a link with what we see with women earning less sometimes. It's not, I mean, a lot of that, it's not really, how to say it, it's not as clear cut as they just get less on their paycheck, but indeed it has a lot to do with being offered positions, or as I mentioned, like a norm you can see maybe in your company or organization, that jobs that require people skills, more caring positions, so to say, or HR, often positions that face the ceiling. You have the glass ceiling. It's basically also a bit the same. Yeah, it has a clear link.
Yeah. Okay.
And also, I want to pick up again on that one. Earlier, we talked about the numbers where only 29% of the lesbian, bisexual, and trans women are fully open, and that there's a difference between the gay, bisexual, and trans men. So you have 29 and you have 44. And this is also partially because women already have an extra ceiling, so the glass ceiling, and they don't want to add another target to their back. So they don't want to be even have to put more effort into proving what they are and what they can do, because they're not only a women, but also they are a part of the LGBT community.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, thank you very much to all participants. If there are no more questions, then I would suggest that we finish the webinar. Like I said, I will send the presentation with the contact details of Eva and Michelle, so additional questions, feel free. Do know that when you close the webinar, you will be directed immediately to a feedback questionnaire, which is important for us, so that we can keep on improving our sessions and our activities. So I would like to ask you to fill that in, and so we get that feedback. Thank you very much, and hope to see you next time. Have a good day. Bye-bye.